Hello, respected viewers. Well, I'm asking this question, does NATO want to end this war in Ukraine? Because I'm unsure myself. I don't think there's a clear answer to it, because by my computation, this is the 17th day of the war, of the full-scale war, of course, has been on for 8 years in eastern Ukraine. And obviously the Russian government has been lying every single day of that, saying that their forces are not attacking Ukraine in Luhansk and Donbass, or saying that Crimea is not part of Ukraine. So you can't believe a single word that the Kremlin says. They lie and lie and lie and lie. And everybody lies, present company included, every government lies. It's a question of how frequently the person or the institution lies and how big that lie is. Is it close to the truth or not? Remember Orwell in the Spanish Civil War said, some people, they told lies, didn't even have the relationship to the truth that's implied by an ordinary lie. Is it an absolute inversion of the truth? And it's that kind of grand scale, whopping, shameless lying that Putin specializes in. So it could be that NATO sees Ukraine as really fighting for it. That is the front line of freedom, and that's why NATO has given Ukraine a lot of weapons. But it hasn't given Ukraine maybe some of the weapons it should do. Ones that will shoot down really high-flying planes. These Stingers, I'm told, will only shoot down planes that are fairly low-flying, or indeed helicopters. They could have provided a lot more. Hello, Kirsty. They could have provided weapons much longer in advance, and the Germans say, oh, well, we don't want to raise tensions, we'll only provide helmets, no actual weapons, a field hospital. Come on, they've been fighting for 8 years. And if NATO had actually properly armed Ukraine years ago, maybe this war wouldn't have happened, because that would have been sufficient deterrence if the Russians said, actually, this is serious. Could we given the Ukrainians mid-range missiles that could actually hit Moscow or something, conventional missiles, so that Putin would realise that Russia would pay a very heavy price indeed. He went through this war thinking it would be a walkover, but obviously he realises intelligence is very faulty, which is why two of the most senior guys in the FSB, that's Russian internal intelligence, have been arrested. Interestingly, not people in military intelligence, the GRU, as in Glavanya Razvedka Upravlenia, or indeed foreign intelligence, the SVR, Служба внешней разведки. NATO might think, well, either the Ukrainians fight Russia or else we have to do. So we'd rather that they fight. It's fought with NATO's steel, but Ukraine's blood. I think it was a mistake for the United States not to expedite and encourage Poland, Bulgaria, and Slovakia handing over their MiG fighters to the Ukrainians, and then the Americans providing other planes gratis to those countries of similar capabilities. And President Biden being a bit circumspect, saying, well, that would be too provocative, Putin might then regard us as actually participating in the conflict. Well, we've already been providing with arms. I mean, it's not like he ever holds back, that he's not provocative. So we've got to help them if they're going to have a chance of winning this war. And what does winning actually mean? Obviously, NATO's outnumbered, Ukraine, there I'm conflating them. Ukraine's so heavily outnumbered by the Russians, but making it sufficiently painful that even Putin draws back. But will he draw back? Remember that Chechnya conflict I was referencing earlier, that 1994 to 96 conflict fought under President Yeltsin. Presumably Putin thinks that Yeltsin got it wrong, shouldn't have given up, or indeed should have turned to chemical weapons, biological weapons, or indeed nuclear weapons, but Yeltsin wasn't willing to do that. I know his army killed several thousand civilians, but even Yeltsin had a limit. That would be too inhumane. He also thought it might outrage world opinion, and he wouldn't get the loans that Russia so desperately needed when it's in dire economic straits. So, but Putin is a dotant. Maybe he's dying anyway. He doesn't mind if he kills the whole world with him. And then a Russian government minister saying, well, Russia might hit NATO supplies. Once they're actually in Ukraine, okay, I can't complain with NATO destroying those. But if it's on NATO soil, I think NATO is morally obliged to respond. If they bomb something, we bomb something. It could be a proportional, symmetric response. And yet that Russian minister said, we're not escalating the situation, or we've been told by Sergei Lavrov it's aggressive to help a democracy defend itself against a tyranny, but it's not aggressive of them to aggress Ukraine to try and wipe it off the map, to slaughter thousands of their civilians. But Russia's paying a very heavy price for this. By some estimates, they've been taking 1,000 casualties a day, which doesn't mean killed. Probably only a quarter of that's killed. For every one killed, there are 3 wounded, and a few prisoners. But 17,000 so far is probably an exaggeration. I would think it's more like 3/4 of that number. So Putin is a dotant. Well, let's hope he is dying. But there is fighting in the fields, and sometimes the open fields. For the Ukrainian infantry, there's hardly even a frutescent growth behind which to take cover. But you know, the thaw is coming to an end. It's no longer so muddy. They are going to be able to drive on hard ground now, the Russians. But this is how Putin was so impatient, didn't take account of the weather, and thought they could just stick to the roads. I mean, it's not like a surprise when the thaw comes. They could have done this a month earlier, and the ground would have been hard. They could have done it about 6 weeks later, and the ground would have been hard. But at the worst possible time. On the other hand, he was also waiting until oil price was sky high. But some people say, if Putin was so pally with Trump, why didn't he do this with Trump? When Trump was president, well, that's partly what Trump was just so unpredictable, such a loose cannon, threatening to nuke North Korea. The other thing about Trump is Putin thought he had a fairly good relationship with him, and I would wreck it if I invaded Ukraine, so let's not, or may gradually pull him apart from NATO. And now some Trump insiders said, had there been a second term, Trump would have left NATO, which would have been a golden opportunity for Putin. Other reasons why they're not doing Trump's presidency, oil prices were quite low. Now that they're sky high, Putin calculated the Western countries couldn't dare reduce oil and gas imports from Russia. So there's incessant lying by the Russian state, accusing the Ukrainians of developing biological, chemical and nuclear weapons, despite Russia's got all of these, not Ukraine. And indeed, Russia has used chemical weapons on multiple occasions in Syria. And they'll always blame the others. I mean, this is the Kremlin's favourite stratagem, is to accuse the victim of the crime you just committed against him. And they'll deal with this with dissidents, get some thug to beat him up, and then charge the victim with starting a fight, things like that. You know, Magnitsky charged him with stealing, was it $275 million in a tax rebate, despite the fact that he was actually not a rich man at all. So there have been numerous war crimes committed by the Putin regime, like the bombing that hospital with parturient mothers in it, claim it was taken over by radicals. I mean, as though that would be justificatory of it. But yeah, NATO is furnishing weapons, which on the one hand makes me think, yeah, NATO wants Ukraine to fight, but it's not giving all the weapons it could to give the Ukrainians a fighting chance. By providing inadequate armament, is that simply prolonging the agony? Now, you know that I'm a scriptorian sort, and I've written on this extensively, where you can see some of my articles in various publications. And NATO might want to beef up the Ukrainian military because of Russia's audacious attitude towards her neighbours. Wanted to take back Moldova, that's an open secret. And, you know, Belarus could be easily absorbed. Putin could just turn to Lukashenko, right, you're totally dependent on us economically. Almost nobody else will trade with you. We got tens of thousands of troops in your country. You've seen what happens to those who defy me. You're part of Russia. Or more likely, some sort of a union state. Okay, you can have theoretical sovereignty. You still have an extra vote in the United Nations, but you will do exactly as I tell you. And our laws are just completely harmonized. So North Korea is on the move with nukes, recognizing that Western countries are distracted with Ukraine, and maybe, I'm sure Putin is encouraging this. And surprisingly, China's not been throwing its weight around, which would be a good chance for them, but they're also seeing the way things go. How does NATO react? Testing Western resolve. But anyway, the sanctions are just certainly hurting Russia, and it's only just the beginning. They only started a fortnight ago. So Peskov, who's Putin's press secretary, he speaks with the president. He says that hopefully unemployment will not rise by millions. So even he reckons it's a serious possibility that millions more people will be unemployed. This is in a country with a working population of 70 million. And unemployment is not too good as it is anyway. So 50% of Muscovites think it's been an economic catastrophe. Now, we've got to be cautious about that because Muscovites are unusually liberal and well-educated and unusually susceptible to foreign sanctions. Deep in the countryside, they don't do much commerce with the West anyway, so they're relatively insulated. But a government poll that said that 71% supported this war just to prevent Ukraine joining NATO, if it was on that basis, to prevent it joining NATO. If it was on another basis, to conquer it, it'd be lower. But even that's even the government's figure. The real figure will be considerably higher. Anyway, so I'd certainly disesteem Putin, as you know, and there's been some susurrus dissent in Russia. There's some Russians I know who heartily disapprove of his illegal war of aggression, but they dare not say so because they have a terminal effect in your career. So I would like to see the Russian state pollarded, but obviously NATO can't declare that as a war aim, or it would make, Putin think this is an existential threat to the Russian state, which he identifies completely with himself. He's a man of raging vanity. So vain, he's never been seen wearing glasses, age 69. Everybody needs these glasses to read by the age of 55. We don't want to push him into pushing that nuclear button, but maybe we shouldn't be too sensitive to either. He's got a complete clown car of a cabinet, and it's this kakistocracy that he wants to impose on Ukraine. And his bright idea is to bring back the despised Yanukovych. He could have had himself a semi-plausible Ukrainian puppet to put there, but he hasn't come up with one despite having 8 years to think about it. So, NATO countries have tried to facilitate peace talks, but the peace talks have actually been held in Belarus, despite it being effectively a co-belligerent, and indeed Turkey. Macron has been on the phone to Putin, but to no avail. The Israeli Prime Minister has been on the phone to Putin, but Putin often wants to settle it with Biden because, of course, Putin doesn't regard Ukraine as a legitimate state at all. I mean, the parallels are very striking with the Nazi attitude to Eastern Europe, and it's not something I'd vote lightly. I don't want to say that I don't want to breach Godwin's law. I'm not saying that Putin wants to annihilate the Ukrainian population. He doesn't. Or indeed he wants to turn them into slaves. He doesn't, but he wants to certainly to subjugate them. Saying that though, Czechoslovakia and Poland, they have no right to exist because we used to rule as territories for centuries. Well, they do have a right to exist under international law. They've been recognised by sovereign states, even by Russia. So it's all very worrying. If he gets away with this, where's next? So he's got to pay a very heavy price. And a lot of good, decent Russians who are suffering economically. And that's unavoidable. I do feel very sorry for them. And they can do nothing about it. I mean, they could protest, but again, you will suffer severely if you do that. It'll be jail. But that might be the only way to end the war, the only way to get prosperity back for them in the end, and the only way to get rid of this madman they have in the Kremlin. So I wish NATO would be firmer about this, but no, I don't want a third world war either. I mean, I suppose deep down Putin doesn't want it either, but he places no value on human life. He's deliberately killed many thousands of his own civilians in Chechnya and indeed in the rest of Russia, as we know. But these losses may become unsustainable. I mean, Russia admitted to 18,000 combat deaths in Afghanistan in 10 years. It's probably much higher than that. So I don't think they can accept high combat deaths forever. All right. Yeah, the CIA said it would predict 4 days. So obviously Ukraine has really fought tougher than anybody predicted. It's been very obstinate as a resistance. But this stubborn resistance makes it even more likely that Putin will resort to weapons of mass destruction. But how will the world react? How should the world react? Some intervention, some bombing of Russian positions in Ukraine, but does that lead to the Third World War? Because we've ratcheted sanctions up to about 95%. They can't really go any higher. That wouldn't hurt them very much more. I think even the Chinese would be aghast at this. The environmental degradation, wheat prices permanently higher if you can't plant things in Ukraine. There's talk that Putin might blow up Chernobyl, but that would hurt Belarus and Western Russia probably more than it would Ukraine. What else might he do? I mean, how else can we hit back if he uses WMD there, a tactical nuclear strike on Russian forces in Ukraine, and that's as far as we're going and not going to hit Russia itself? These are agonizing decisions. That's why it's very lonely to be a leader. All right, so I'm thinking aloud, and there are no easy answers here. And it does make me wonder, is appeasement, is that a better option? I have to think aloud. That's enough from me. Please send me your answers. Toodaloo.